Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the Renaissance. This is a quick overview video that you'll need for your power focus areas. If you want more information on the Renaissance or you find this area very interesting, you could check out the challenge focus areas on the Renaissance. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Your video goals are to tell me, 1, what is/was the Renaissance? 2, why does the Renaissance begin in Italy around the year 1350? And 3, why were these things a big deal? These 4 things here: humanism, the printing press, Michelangelo, and Machiavelli. You might want to write those down. We'll get back to these in a minute. So, first of all, what is the Renaissance? The Renaissance is a French word that means rebirth. And you might wonder, well, what's being reborn? People who use the word Renaissance thought that what was happening in Italy around the year 1350 was the rebirth of classical culture, of the really cool stuff that was going on in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. People thought that during the Middle Ages, a lot of these ideas went missing or were lost, and during the Renaissance, we get these ideas back. We'll talk about it more later. What was going on during the Renaissance? There's a couple big changes that happened during the Renaissance that you need to know about. So the Renaissance was characterized by 4 things. 1 was the breakdown of medieval beliefs. So in the Middle Ages, people basically thought about the world in Christian terms, in Europe anyway. Everything that went on in the world they understood in terms of what they were told by the Catholic Church. So they were told that humans were bad and sinful, that this life wasn't really important and this world could never be made better, and that the only way to have a good life was to listen to the church so you could go to heaven afterwards. So the medieval world was all about the church and thought that life was not a very good thing here on earth. This idea starts to break down for 2 big reasons. 1 was because of the Black Death. The Black Death was terrifying and nobody could explain it, not even the church. So this led some people to start to look for new ideas. And 2 is there were a lot of church scandals going on in and around the year 1300. And so this made the church look kind of bad, and people stopped listening to the church and started looking for their own ideas. All right, 2. As these old ideas break down, people start to develop new ideas about humanity. And we're going to talk about those ideas more in a little bit. 3, there was a big focus on ancient Rome and ancient Greece. People thought that if you studied ancient Rome and ancient Greece, you could learn a lot because they were very advanced civilizations. They did a lot of stuff that people had forgotten about. Last of all, there was a period, this whole period was a time of rapid advancement in art and science. So it kicks off this period of technological progress that is still going on today. So it's largely because of the Renaissance that later we get modern science, and then it's largely because of modern science that we end up here with like computers and stuff. We'll talk about that more later. So let's move on to our second question, which is, why does it start in Italy? So there's a couple big reasons. 1 is that in Italy, there were a lot of rich cities. So you might remember that in the Middle Ages, almost everybody was a farmer. And this was still true in the year 1350 for most places in Europe, but not in Italy. In Italy, there was a lot of trade, and because of a lot of trade, there were a lot of big cities. And the people in these cities were educated. You had to know how to read and write and count to, trade effectively. So the educated people in these cities started looking for new ways to do stuff, and they started to think, hey, life's not that bad. We're pretty rich. We've got lots of good stuff. Maybe the church is wrong. So that's one reason. The second reason is that in Italy, there was a lot of contact with other cultures. So because they were trading with places like the Middle East, they got a lot of cool ideas, including they got a lot of philosophy. The Middle East, as you might remember, was a hotbed for philosophy during the Middle Ages. So Italians started to learn all about philosophy from their contact with the Middle East. They also started to think about Rome and Greece because Italy was where the Roman Empire was centered, and they were surrounded by reminders of the Roman Empire. So they were surrounded by all these amazing ruins, and people were saying, hey, how come the Romans could build this and we can't build it? So some people said, well, why don't we study the Romans and see if we can figure it out? So those are the two big reasons. Lots of cities where there are rich people who are feeling confident and good about themselves, and two, lots of cultural ideas in Italy that inspire people to look for new answers. So that's why it starts in Italy. And once it starts in Italy, it spreads and becomes really popular all over the place, especially in Northern Europe, like Germany and England and France. So anyway, now let's look at some major developments of the Renaissance. So I'm going to go through this all really fast. If you want to learn more, do the challenge focus area on the Renaissance. There's a lot more to be said here. So the first really big idea in the Renaissance is a cultural movement, an intellectual movement called humanism. Humanism is a new way of looking at the world. The old way of looking at the world that was taught by the Catholic Church was that humanity was bad, that we were sinful creatures, and that we needed the church and Jesus to save us. Humanism said that humans are actually good, and that life is a precious gift, and that we, humans, can make the world even better by working hard and using our brains to solve problems. So humanism believes that humans are good and that progress, making the world better, is possible. And humanists taught that we should study the world and use our minds to make the world better. So rather than studying like theology, which is where you sit around and think about God all day, humanists said we should learn about the world. So we should study the world. We should do mathematics. We should study history. We should study languages. And we should use what we learn to make the world better. So that's humanism. The most famous humanist scholar is a dude named Erasmus. And the reason he is so famous is he said that humans could even use our brains to understand religion and to understand God. So rather than just listen to whatever the Pope says, we should use our own minds to think about God and why we're here and what we ought to do and what the Bible really teaches us. And this is a very dangerous idea because once people start to question the teachings of the church, a lot of problems arise. And it's from a lot of Erasmus's ideas that we're going to see the Protestant Reformation and Martin Luther and a whole bunch of other problems arise. So Erasmus asks a lot of good questions, and Europe spends the next 150 years trying to answer them. And you'll learn about that later. Next, maybe the most important invention of the period is the printing press, developed by a dude in Germany named Johannes Gutenberg, up there. Right there. So the printing press is super important because it makes it very, very easy to produce books. If you were in the Middle Ages and you wanted to make a book, you had to write it by hand. Just imagine how long it would take to write an entire book by hand. For example, a professional scribe in the Middle Ages took 4 months to produce one copy of the Bible. And even then, he would still make some mistakes because, you know, you're copying like 1 million words. You're going to make a few mistakes. So it was very, very hard to make lots of books, and there weren't very many books. So not very many people could read, and the people who could read could only read like a couple hundred different types of books. So the printing press allowed for one person to produce, instead of one book every 4 months, they could produce like 10,000 books in a month. So that just totally changes the game. books go from being these incredibly rare objects to being kind of normal. And normal people can afford books and start to read. This is super important because it allows normal people to start to learn about the world and to think for themselves about the world. If it wasn't for the printing press, the Renaissance might never have spread out of Italy. And people would have probably never have started to think about the world in this more like scientific, rational way of looking at things. So the printing press, I think, you could point to as the most important invention of this time period. 3, you get all sorts of amazing art during this time period. And art is actually very, very important for rulers, because if you want to spread your ideas to a lot of people, you have to use artwork, because the vast majority of people, 90% of people, cannot read anything. So if you want to teach people about the church, if you want to teach people about you and why you're such a good king, you have to hire artists to paint pictures or carve sculptures. And during the Renaissance, artists become kind of scientific. They start to study art and how to make really good art. And art becomes a very powerful force for rulers. So the church and kings hire artists to paint amazing pictures and sculpt amazing sculptures and build amazing buildings, all as a way of building up their own power and convincing people to listen to them. And the greatest artist of this time period is a dude named Michelangelo. You might have heard of him. We'll look at some of his pictures in class. But basically, Michelangelo learns how to portray reality in such a powerful way that his pictures are still regarded as overwhelming masterpieces, even today. Even in a world where we now have computer technology, his paintings are still overwhelming. And if you ever have a chance to go to Rome and see Michelangelo's paintings, you will never forget it. And last of all, we get this dude named Machiavelli. Machiavelli is one of the most important thinkers in European history. And the reason he is so important is he rethinks what governments should do. The old idea was that governments should basically just always do what's right. If you're a king, you should just always do what the Bible says. You should be a good Christian king. And Machiavelli, using humanist ideas, says, well, maybe not. What Machiavelli says is that the most important thing for a king to do is to make sure he is powerful. The only job for a king is to expand his own power and to build up his own army and to make sure that his state is safe. This is a really interesting idea. Machiavelli says that the most important thing for a king to do is to keep his state strong, because if your state is weak, you will have chaos and collapse and suffering. So even though it might seem bad to, execute criminals or fight wars, a king has to do this because otherwise his state will be weak and it will be taken over. So Machiavelli tells kings that it's okay to be ruthless and it's okay to seek as much power as possible. And what's going to happen is kings are going to take Machiavelli's ideas and use them. And what we're going to see is that by the end of the Renaissance, we have kings who are more powerful than ever before. They've got advanced technology, they've got amazing artists, and they have now Machiavelli telling them that it is okay to be as powerful and as ruthless as possible. So anyway, all of these changes together are super important, and they usher in a period of very, very rapid change and advancement. You get better technology, more powerful kingdoms, better art, and increasing understandings of science and the natural world. And all of this is going to kick off even more change, and it's going to make Europe super duper powerful. So we're going to talk all about the effects of this in later lessons. So anyway, that's the Renaissance for you guys today. I hope you found it interesting. I hope it all made sense. If not, please ask me questions in class. Bye.